Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Alexandre Alaphilippe, and I'm the Executive Director of EU Disinfolab. Welcome to our new webinar. We are waiting until the participants are coming. So, as you may know, we are organizing these webinars regularly to invite guests to present the case studies, to present trends that are relevant for the counter-disinformation community in Europe and beyond. We're very happy today to have not the last webinar of the season, but almost the last one. Before we start with this webinar, we're going to ask you to a few housekeeping rules. We're going to use for our Q&A a tool called Slido. You can access to the tool using slido.com and the hashtag disinfo. So all our questions, we'll take them from the Slido tool. And I think we have a little bit of survey to start this. I would ask our dear colleague Mathilde, yes, to join us. Where are you joining us from today using Slido? I am not sure this slide is working. But anyway, you can go on slido.com, hashtag disinfo, yes. And meanwhile that you are actually feeling this, I'm going to start with a presentation of our webinar today. So we're very happy to receive today Victoire Rio. Victoire is the executive director and founder of What to Fix. What to Fix is has been working a lot on monetization issues of disinformation. And today, Victoire and What to Fix team are coming to present this. I'm also adding that there are possibility for captions if you would like to use different captions in your and different languages for subtitles. You can like display subtitles and choose your language. We're gonna have today Victoire coming to talk about sanctions. So what? How Meta may have channeled money to EU sanction Russian propaganda outlets. We're talking about Meta Ireland Limited. And building on the 5.5-year archive of Meta's active partner publishers list, What to Fix found that Meta actually continued, in some cases, even initiated new revenue distribution partnerships with Russia Today, with Sputnik, and with other EU sanctioned entities and sometimes individuals, months after the introduction of EU sanctions. And the investigation points to serious concerns with Meta's sanctions compliance, as well as to a need for greater scrutiny and oversight of social media monetization services. Victoire, welcome. You can jump on stage. Victoire, you're a tech accountability expert and the founder of What to Fix, a nonprofit focused on promoting internet integrity and addressing systemic risks in technology. Your work emphasizes the need for accountability in tech companies, particularly in relation to their impact on information integrity and digital rights. Victoire, you have the floor for around 25 minutes for a very dense presentation. You can already, people, start to put your questions as Victoire is speaking, and we're going to take them at the end of the session. Victoire, I think you can share your screen. Normally, it should work.
It should.
We can hear you.
Can you see the screen?
We can see the screen.
Here.
It's full screen and it's perfect. The floor is yours for 25-30 minutes.
Just 1 second. Hold up. Can you see my screen?
We can still see your screen.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Alexandre. And as you just mentioned, we released an investigation on the 20th of June, which revealed that Facebook pages affiliated with RT, Sputnik, and other EU sanctioned entities were able to gain and maintain access to Facebook revenue redistribution programs for several months after being put on the sanction, and that some of them were still monetizing as of early June of this year. So the first thing that you need to understand is that Facebook offers different ways for content publishers to make money from their Facebook activity. So content publishers can monetize from their audience through tips and subscription features. They can monetize from brands through a branded content partnership, and they can monetize from the platform itself through a revenue redistribution program. And there have been a number of this program over the years, but these are essentially rewarding content publisher for the engagement that their content generates. So Meta releases something called a partner publisher list. And these are lists that essentially document all of the active participants in its revenue redistribution program. The problem with this list is that they only reflect the participants that are active at a given time. So for a little over 5.5 years, I've been backing up this list to consolidate an archive of all the Facebook and Instagram accounts that have been part of Meta's revenue redistribution program globally over that period. Now, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Meta was very clear in its announcement that it was demonetizing all of the accounts associated with Russian state media. And looking at the list and drawing on the archive data, we were able to confirm that this was true. Meta unlisted all of the RT and Sputnik affiliated pages that had previously been active on their revenue redistribution programs. Now, we don't have lists for every single day. So what you see here on the screen in gray, that's the periods where we can't quite confirm for sure whether the pages were listed in the program or not. But what we can confirm is that none of the pages were listed in the file dated 26th of February, which is when Meta announced that it had demonetized all of those pages. But looking at the longer archive, we noticed something interesting. We noticed that while Meta had originally delisted all of the RT and Sputnik pages, all of the Sputnik pages eventually came back starting in October of 2022. Now, the timeline that you see is also interesting because it suggests that the pages returned were not necessarily an automated error. The pages of Sputnik France, Sputnik Italia, SNA, which is Sputnik Deutschland, they were all added onto a new program called Ads on Reel, which is what you see in purple on the screen. And that will have required the admins of the page to apply and Meta to conduct an onboarding review. The pages also didn't all return at the same time, which suggests that the process of return wasn't the result of an automated time restriction, which Meta sometimes does. And if you look at later listings and unlistings, you can see some pattern emerge as well that suggests that some of these pages may have had some admin or payout accounts overlap. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but we think that it's possible that the return was the result of admins registering new admin or payout accounts. Okay, looking at the archive, we also found a page for RT Arabic, which was onboarded into the in-stream video ad program in July of 2023. Now, this page was created after the invasion of Ukraine in December of 2022, and it wasn't blue tick like the other ones, but it had been labeled by Meta as a Russia state-controlled media. And it was still actively listed as monetized in early June of this year, despite Meta's stated global ban on RT. All right. When it comes to sanctions, the EU sanctions, there are two distinct set of sanctions that were applied by the EU, and I think it's really important that we kind of understand how those two overlap. The first set of sanctions, which came into effect on 1st of March 2022, were broadcasting sanctions, and these were very explicitly targeting RT and Sputnik, and they focused squarely on content broadcasting. The EU then later introduced financial sanctions against RT and Sputnik's parent entities, that's TV Novosti and Rossiya Segonia, which went further and essentially mandated the freezing of this actor's assets and prohibited the provision of funds and economic resources. I'm not a sanction expert, and when it comes to this, the EU is very clear that the European Court of Justice is the ultimate authority, so it's not going to be for me to make an assessment as to whether or not Meta violated sanctions, but the European Commission does provide a pretty comprehensive FAQs that give some interesting guidance. So when it comes to the broadcasting sanctions, for example, the FAQ clarifies that broadcasting includes online content dissemination. It also specifies that the broadcasting prohibition applies to any person or entity exercising a commercial or professional activity that broadcast or enable, facilitate, or otherwise contribute to broadcast impacted content. And finally, it does clarify that making broadcasting available can amount to making economic resources available, which is an interesting link with the financial sanction. When it comes to the financial sanctions, the FAQ clarified that the sanction also applied to entities deemed to be owned or controlled by a listed entity, and that the operator is subject to an obligation of result, which should include a beneficial ownership assessment. When it comes to sanction in general, there's a strong emphasis on knowledge and intent. And here the Commission makes it clear that participating in an activity while being aware that it could be a violation and accepting that possibility can also qualify as intent. And then finally, as it relates to automated processes, the Commission clarifies that the tacit prolongation of a contract is treated like a new contract and also prohibited. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the financial sanctions were put on RT and Sputnik parent entities. That's TV Novosti and Rossiya Segonia. That means that RT and Sputnik are not directly listed in the financial sanction list, even if there may be a case that could be made that they are owned and controlled by the listed entities. So as part of our investigation, we decided to check if any of the explicitly listed actors were also part of the programs. Now, many of the listed actors are obscure military and business individuals, so we couldn't really verify their Facebook pages. But we found at least 2 actors whose pages we could affiliate with a very high degree of certainty. One was the Russian singer Polina Gagarina, who was put under sanctions in June of 2024 and was listed as monetized until January of this year. As you can see here on the screen, she claimed responsibility for the Facebook page, and we also documented links to the page from her official website. The second actor we looked at is Sylvain Affoy, who has an official pseudonym Egaunchi Behansen, who is also listed on the sanction list. And it's a fairly recent addition to the sanction list. He was added on the 20th of May, 2025. But still, we found that he was actively part of Meta's in-stream video ads and ads on Reel programs as of early June of this year. We were also able to document ads running on his page and to confirm that he had access to other monetization services like Facebook subscription service, Subscriber Hub. Now, as we were running this investigation, we also ran into a number of pages which didn't quite seem official, but were nonetheless broadcasting sanctioned content. And this is quite interesting because they may just be impersonator pages repurposing content from sanctioned actors, and they may not directly benefit actors financially, but they're nonetheless supporting their broadcasting, and Meta's revenue redistribution program may actually be what's incentivizing it. So we reached out to Meta with our finding for comments prior to publication and haven't heard back. But our media partners did. And Meta essentially stated that it is committed to complying with applicable sanctions law, including EU sanction, and that it is committed to enforcing against accounts that it identifies as being run by or on behalf of sanctioned entities. As far as our findings were concerned, it essentially said that being on their partner publisher list was not itself evidence that an account received payout. And that is true, and we noted that in our investigation, but it doesn't address the question of whether or not they made any payment available to these actors. We also looked a little deeper into the payout process because in order to receive payment, accounts have to register a payout account, and this is what Meta makes reference to in its comment. But when we look deeper into the payout setup process, we also noted that it is possible for people to accrue revenue before setting up a payout account. There are limits to the amount of money that can be accrued, but that still raises question over whether these actors were able to accrue revenue, and if they did, what Meta did with that money, and whether it reported it to sanctions authority as a frozen asset. The payout process, we also sort of looking at the Help Center page. The Help Center page also clarifies that users have up to 6 months to register a payout account before they forfeit the accrued revenue. Now, all of the accounts we were looking at, with the exception of Sylvain Foy, were registered for more than 6 months after the sanctions were introduced. And that raises question over why Meta will have kept them in as a partner if they didn't register a valid payout account. Also in the Help Center, Meta says that publishers can adjust their payout account at any time, which raises questions over whether Meta allowed them to reapply using a different identity and payout account. And if they did, whether they approved those payout account and eventually transferred money to these actors. Also interesting is the fact that these accounts were another reason why we're concerned about the fact that these accounts were partner publishers of Meta is because Meta is presenting ads sold on these pages as if they are ad placement on vetted publishers. So to Meta, the partner publisher list is a brand safety tool. It's found in the Brand Safety and Suitability Center. And Meta also gives the option to advertisers to opt out of content that is coming from non-partner publishers, presumably because these are deemed higher risk because the publisher didn't sign the monetization policy and wasn't subject to the same level of reviews. So fundamentally, what this investigation shows is that there is a need for much greater scrutiny of platform monetization system. Meta makes public references to being independently audited and certified by an entity called the Media Rating Council, which is an industry self-regulatory body. And clearly that's not sufficient. As we show with our investigation, there are also issues with the platform's review process. Well, not just issues with the platform review processes, but also with the public disclosures that are being made. And to this day, we're still not clear whether the advertisers who had ads that run on sanction pages, whether they were notified or even compensated. So a lot of information that's still lacking and quite a lot of questions around all of those different processes. Ultimately, though, Meta removed all of the 4 pages that we had identified as still being listed in June. And they did that on the 15th of June after we and the media reached out to them for comments. But actors like Sylvain Foy, for example, still have a page that's visible in the EU. They are still seemingly making use of other monetization and broadcasting tools like the Facebook subscriber hub, which you see here, which allows their audience to pay them monthly subscription fees, as well as broadcasting channels on both Facebook and WhatsApp. So I want to make it clear that the reason that our study focused only on Meta is because that's the only company that releases data. But it's important to say that every other major social media platform offer monetization services and revenue redistribution programs. In fact, YouTube invented the model with the YouTube Partner Program in 2008. And the only platform that was holding out, LinkedIn, just launched a program in May this year. As you can see, the monetization services are growing really, really, really quickly. The graph that I have here on the screen, that's Facebook's revenue redistribution program's membership through to May of this year. As you can see, we've gone from exponential growth starting in 2023 to essentially rocket growth in recent months. And that's not even including the more than 1.5 million accounts that have been added in the month of June. So the key takeaway here is that social media monetization is here to stay. And to be clear, that's not a bad thing. We actually want platforms to redistribute more revenue, but we really need far more scrutiny and oversight. And when we talk about tech accountability, we really need to hold platform accountable, not just for the content governance, but also for the monetization governance. And I want to reiterate here that the goal is not to attack Meta for its transparency, right? Our focus really is on holding everyone to greater transparency and accountability standards, and really for everyone else to start getting more data out there in the first place. This being said, there are a few important shortcomings with Meta's transparency disclosures, which I think are worth sort of digging into briefly. So I already mentioned the fact that there is no historical data. The data that Meta provides is only the list of accounts that are currently in the program. I also want to draw your attention to what, for, I guess, a lack of a better word, I'm going to call the known unknowns. But Meta doesn't tell us who the contracted entity is, right? So if you see the heading of those columns, there's a column called publisher. That is not a legal entity. That's essentially the name of the Facebook page. And so that's quite limiting. Equally, Meta doesn't tell us who the contracting entity is, whether that's Meta Platforms Island or Meta Inc. And that's something we kind of took a closer look at as part of this investigation, because we really wanted to try to understand whether we were dealing with a European company here and what could be the distinction. And what we found was that a remittance payments that are being issued to a participant in those programs in the EU all seem to appear to come from a Meta Platforms Island. And that even for places as far away as Dubai or China, the remittance payments were also coming from Meta Platforms Island. So our impression is that Meta Platforms Island is a contracting entity for most of those contracts, perhaps with the exception of the US or North America. And finally, and quite importantly, Meta does not specify in its disclosure whether there were any fund transfers, and if there were any, what the amounts that were transferred were. Another important takeaway from this investigation and backing up this data over the years is really to do with the quality of the data. And it's important to, like, it's obviously this is not the only sort of data transparency, but if these data transparencies are not being audited, then it really raises question about the quality. And what you can see here in particular is to do with a field called date added. And this is a field that is supposed to reflect when the page was last added into a program. And as you can see here, the dates are all in the early 2010, but the program in question was only started in 2018. So we see this, we saw this happen a lot, particularly since November of last year. We're seeing a ton of inaccuracy with that column in particular, which is very complicated when we're trying to build an archive, because we then have to run a correction algorithm to fix those dates and get the timelines right. And then finally, we made a pretty interesting discovery when it came to sort of Meta transparency as applicable to this, but also other transparency tools. And what we found essentially was that Meta, a publisher list, which has a front end tool, what was showing up on the front end didn't always match what was on the CSV file. So what you see here on the screen is a page RT Arabic, which was showing up in the CSV, but when we were searching for it on the front end, it would return essentially a negative result. And so we investigated this issue a bit deeper. And what we found was that this is a recurring issue with pages that are gated. Gated pages are essentially pages that are being blocked from being seen in some countries or by some audiences. And that can be done by either Meta or the page admin. But it's a very important finding, because it means that the front-end tool can be actively misleading. And so that's an issue that we are digging deeper into and doing a full write-up on. So we'll make sure to have this available shortly. Right. I'm going to stop here to leave us time for a discussion and for questions. But if you haven't had the chance to read the report already, we go through all of the evidence in detail and the various limitations with meta disclosures. So I would really recommend that you take a look at the detail. Also, if you have any accounts that you're investigating, which you would like us to check for monetization, I'm leaving a QR code here. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, really happy to elaborate on everything. And I look forward to a fantastic chat on what we might be able to do to bring more accountability to social media monetization.
Thanks a lot, Victoire, for unfolding this and helping everybody to get in touch with that. It's very often that we hear from the side that, how, people are doing ads on platform and stuff, but it's less about how platforms are actually paying for the content that they are hosting. We're going to go with the questions. I'm going to ask our dear Mathilde to share the screen. We have already a few questions. Question from Joe Cruz. Are there differences between X and Meta paying people for publishing their content on the platform? So we know that around X, we know that some accounts now are being paid on X also. Is it the same kind of partnership on the two platforms?
Yes and no. It is a similar idea. X actually started in July of 2023. The big difference with X is you need to be blue ticked. So you need to be a paying customer to be able to participate. And you only earn money from views that come from other paying customers, which isn't the case with Meta.
Okay, so that's the main difference. Is like you need to be a paid customer.
So
Where
it's not you're not monetizing from engagement across a whole ecosystem. You're really only monetizing from views that come from other blue ticked paying customers.
Okay, so it's basically from paid subscriber to paid subscribers. So like the highly influential or the highly paid payers to be seen by the by the other payers and not by the usual the average Joe, let's say. Let's call it like this.
Yeah, so they're
Joe Cruz.
basically being paid from the revenue that X gets through the subscription services.
Okay, so it's for distribution of subscription. Okay, thank you. And Margaret has answered. Like about the scrutiny and about being able to check. You mentioned someone using a fake name. If it was understood correctly, how could Meta prevent verified identity? And is it possible to use another person's data in the payroll? So can I be as a scammer, for instance, like put the tax ID of somebody I don't know about, and then I'm just like benefiting from this?
There are huge networks of shady agents that do that. X is actually just launched a court case against 6 Vietnamese individuals, claiming that they used fake identities of real identities of American citizens. We see quite a lot of agents offering the services. So yes, it is possible. I think in regards to this particular investigation, our main finding is that the platform should have known from the data that they had from the Facebook page who the beneficial owner was, regardless of who was sort of the name on the payout account.
Okay, so there are possibilities to scam, but normally there are enough safeguards to prevent this from happening.
Well, I mean, technically, so this is part of the question we have, right? So there's the whole process is very obscure in terms of how do they do their review. And so what we do know is that in order to apply for a program, you're supposed to provide some basic information and sign the monetization policy and then go through a review process. And that process is meant to, or we understand that, to look at your Facebook page, making sure that you meet the monetization terms and policies, right? And then you have to separately register a payout account. And that payout account also goes through a review process. What's not clear to us is how is Meta making the connections between the two? And obviously it should, because it has all the information to know that this payout account, if it's associated with an RT page, no matter who is the actual name on it, will ultimately benefit the owner of the RT page. So that should be possible, but we don't know at this point because we have very little information about how those processes actually work.
Yeah, because we could also imagine that there are, for instance, some media agency that could be registered as a partner publisher and then have different payout accounts for their clients and influencers, for instance. So with no direct link between one entity and the other. That's something that would that a pattern that could work, for instance, using intermediaries?
I mean, yeah. So they are obviously possible. So what it does say in the what Meta says around the registration of the payout is that the name, like your tax ID name, should match the name that you use to register in the program, technically. So those two things should be matching. What we seem to see is that that's not necessarily always the case, but it should technically match. This being said, there's also the option of having more than one payout account, right? So if you run a page, you could register several accounts and kind of redirect the page to different payout accounts. So a lot of the challenge essentially is what are the current processes to review this, and are they adequate, both in terms of sanctions control, but more generally in with regards to any of those partnerships, really.
Yeah. In your research, any data on interactions between the pages that you have seen and potential other flagging by verification or content moderation? So like I don't know, a page that you have flagged and is under sanctions also could be also multiply flagged for infraction to other terms and policies or other sanction related or illegal content if we look at sanction entities.
So if you remember the graph I showed earlier that shows the timelines of all of these, it's a little bit like a barcode. Sometimes you have holes and it starts again and it's kind of on and off, right? And often what seems to be happening is when a page is taken off and back in, it's often linked to a content moderation flag of some sorts. So sometimes, and actually quite often, we see gaps that are exactly 90 days. 90 days is a period for a strike. After 90 days, the strike sort of expires. And so it seems that it will seem, again, a lot of this thing is Meta doesn't provide a lot of transparency, nor do any of the other companies. But it will seem that pages often get automatically delisted and demonetized when they are committing certain infraction on the content moderation policies. And then once those sanctions are lifted, they're added right back into the system.
Okay. Thank you, Victoire. Next question. Do you think Meta does this on purpose to monetize on disinformation propaganda? You can call your lawyer on that question, Victoire, of course.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that per se. I I think it's a lot more complicated than this. I think I wouldn't say that they're purposely monetizing disinformation and propaganda. I think they are not necessarily investing as much as they should in systems that could properly and adequately moderate all of this.
According, because it's not the first time you're looking into we said like it's a 5.5 year archive of data. We're going to come back to the data question after, I think. But do you see this as a prominent part of what you see in terms of what's inside the data? Do you see this as also a systemic issue that is being repeated and repeated again? So what's your view on that?
We see systemic failures of enforcing their own policies and their monetization terms. Yes. I wouldn't go as far as like they're purposely funding disinformation or sanctioned entities. That's a whole different game. But for example, in the archive, so Meta's policy very clearly states that politicians and political parties and government actors are not meant to monetize, right? And in this archive, we see a lot of political parties, we see a lot of politicians, we see police pages, we see military pages. So like pages that Meta will have had the data, like they're blue ticked, they're verified, they're very clearly official, and they still get through those verification processes. So clearly there's a pattern of verification processes not being sufficient. Now, and then more broadly, what we also see is a lot of pages that are very clearly leveraging stolen content or stolen identity also passing through. So kind of a lot of the AI slop now, but previously it was a lot of stolen content from other creators that was being repurposed, sometimes with a little bit of AI editing added. But essentially that we see sort of the long tail is a lot of those kind of accounts. And again, like what we were pointing to is concern with the due diligence processes that go into this review processes, both when they accept pages into the program or accounts into the program, because actually for the last few years, it's not just pages on Meta, but it's also a digital creator account. So you can switch your personal account to a creator account and start monetizing an account and not just a page. So yeah, we've seen like just challenges with regards to the enforcement of their policies. There's definitely issues there. And as I mentioned earlier, in the last few days, we saw them add another 1.5 million accounts. So I don't know how you're supposed to do a review of 1.5 million accounts in a few days, but that also kind of puts a lot of concerns around the adequacy of that whole process.
Okay, thank you. About this, you mentioned 1.5 million accounts. There is always this question about, number of accounts. What does it mean, etc. So how many accounts are there? Are you able first to break down accounts by like how many of these partnership accounts we have in Europe, and do we have any in the world, and do we have any vision on how much Meta is globally redistributing money? Like what's the budget? Are we talking about €1 per month per account in average? Are we talking to, I don't know, 200, 2,000?
So again, platforms are very shady about giving number on all of this, but the latest data that Meta provided was for 2023. And in 2023, they said they redistributed approximately $2 billion. Now, in 2023, they had and then at the same time that they released a data point of 2 billion, they say that from the start of the program to roughly that period, they had monetized a total of 4 million accounts. Now, since then, 2023 is when it starts to really exponentially grow. And then 2025 is when it starts to skyrocket, right? So in the last, between January and May of this year, we had another 1.5 million new accounts that were added to the program. Between June 15 and June 26, we had another 1.5 million added, right? So what took about 5 months, then took about 2 weeks or less. So it's growing like crazy. And so again, if they were distributing $2 billion back in 2023, we're now looking at 2.5, 3 times the volume of account for this year. I'm not saying it's necessarily proportional, but it's definitely a lot higher. Yeah, I mean that's part of the problem, is that we don't have data. To your point on can we single out European accounts? I wish we could, and we did try when we were building the archive. Whilst CrowdTangle still existed, we tried to grab a set to be able to get the location of the admins, to be able to kind of cross-reference, because one of the things that's also very interesting is we see a lot of accounts that are publishing in the, let's say, European language. So a language that's only spoken in like a few places, right? Whether it's Dutch or Czech or Slovak. And then a ton of the admins coming from Vietnam or from the Philippines, right? And I'm sure they are digital nomads in those places, but certainly not at that volume, right? So we start to see those mismatch, and that's super interesting. And I think it's also, it should be a factor in terms of having heightened due diligence for those pages. And it's also, when we talk about pages that are spreading disinformation, those are automated accounts that are producing content industrially and often using Gen AI or stolen content. So they have absolutely no idea what they're spreading, which is super concerning, obviously, particularly now that the Russians and the Chinese are actively grooming LLMs. So that stuff is definitely happening, but that's not a data point that is provided as part of the disclosure that Meta is providing. And again, like Meta is the only company that releases data at this point, right? And part of what we would like to see is a push for other companies to release this data and for us to have those conversations about what data points will actually be useful. So that we can sort of, like, what we have now is a proof of concept. We've built a 5.5-year archive, which we are trying as much as we can to continue to grow. Now, when I started this 5.5 years ago, I'll download a file and there will be 80,000 lines in that file, right? Today, when I get the new data, I get 13 million entries. So it's a whole different game. And 13 million entry every day quickly build up to an infrastructure which I don't think we're going to be able to maintain for much longer.
I remember when you started, it was a CSV file to download manually, if I'm not mistaken.
It is still a CSV file that you have to download manually, but the problem is I don't think they build the system for the volume that they're currently dealing with. So now what happened is CSV files can only include 1 million lines. So when you have 6.1 million pages in one program, you now need 7 files. And so what the Meta system does is it goes internally, fetch the stuff, put them in CSVs, and then you get in zip files. And so you get one zip file for each program that then gets zipped together and sent back to you. And what seems to be happening is the whole process times out 99% of the time.
If only there were some data scientists and engineers in Meta to fix that. Maybe it's a call we can make to maybe to hire someone who could provide data. I think it's the point also, like, so how much of the data you used in the study was publicly available data, and I think the next thing is what data are you missing today?
Okay, so all the data that we used was data that so all the partner publisher list data is data that we downloaded from their tool, which has a big fat download button. Essentially, I pressed this button more time than I can count over the last 5.5 years, but it was all data that's publicly available. The only thing is it's data that only exists for a day, because it's the file of that day. So if you don't grab it, then you can't grab it again. So in terms of can you reproduce our finding directly, no, you wouldn't be able to without relying on our archive or getting the data from Meta again. And this is another thing that we're pushing for, right? If we could get platforms, and this is maybe an area in which the EU could help in really pushing for platforms to release a publisher archive. Now we have an ad archive, but we could very much foresee having something similar on the publisher side.
I don't know if we have anybody from the European Commission or from a regulator in the room, but that might be indeed a very interesting question to ask. Talking about this question about regulators, maybe I want to take this one because the question about regulators might be the last one. Is there any way to differentiate if Meta Ireland Limited is acting differently from Meta US? So basically, you could have an argument saying that, yes, there are EU sanctions against some people, but actually Meta US paying, so it's not Meta Ireland, so it's not EU sanctions. I don't know.
So what we show in the study, is that the remittance payments are actually coming from Meta Platform Island for most participants, at least participants in Europe, and the examples we looked at in Asia and in the Middle East, the remittance header was very clearly Meta Platform Island Limited. So our assumption is that unless the partnership is, and again, we don't know if, it's something I'm actually now trying to investigate to crowdsource sort of the header of remittance payment from people in different countries to just get a sense of exactly how is it spread. But our understanding is that for most places in the world, it's Meta Platform Island.
Okay. Thank you. So we talked a lot about compliance. I'm just mentioning we still have 5 more minutes after this. So if you have a question, that's really the time to ask for it. In terms of compliance, so you mentioned like all the steps that should be taken in terms of due diligence and compliance by Meta, from at the time people register, at the time of the payout account, etc. So when we look at EU sanctions or any kind of sanctions being taken and illegality of like provide economical support or and freeze economic assets, who should be in charge to verify this compliance and due diligence? So is it the Commission saying like after the Council sanctions, we need to send a notification to everybody so it goes like this? Is it because it's Meta Island that an Irish authority should be doing this? Is it the Digital Service Coordinator? Is it another authority? Is like, how does it work, and who should verify? Because if it's just sanctions being taken, but there is no next steps into requesting data and verifying that they are enforced, then everybody can actually mention that they've not been informed, so they were not aware, and now they are aware. There will be much more awareness and much more due diligence in the future.
So there are people that are way better experts than me on this, but my understanding is that the Commission is trying, or like the European Union is trying to expand its mandate when it comes to sanction enforcement, but that prior to this, it was really at the member state level. So on our end, we basically submitted our findings to the sanction authority in countries that were relevant, and in this case, that's Ireland because of the payments, but also France, Italy, and Germany, who all had pages that were clearly targeted in the markets. Now that's on the sanction side, right? But more broadly, when it comes to the processes, I think there's ground for the DSA enforcement team to potentially request information. There's ground for the DSEs to potentially just request more information on those programs. Like again, the only reason we have this data is because I've pressed the button for 5.5 years, right? Like I think that's quite important to keep in mind. And if you go to the Transparency Center or the transparency reports of any of those platforms, there's nothing about their monetization services, right? You can go to the Transparency Center, you'll find the advertising policies, you won't find the monetization policies. You won't find any information about what are the processes to enforce the monetization policies. You won't find any data about the effectiveness of it, right? We have in the transparency report, you can see that, I don't know, 99% of the hate speech that was removed by Meta was proactively identified through their system, right? It doesn't tell you what percentage of that hate speech was coming from accounts that they themselves monetized. It could, technically, right? So there's very little information, and in large part it's because none of us have been asking, right? The focus on tech accountability has been focused on content governance. Talk a lot about content moderation. We talk a lot about recommender systems. We talk a lot about, or increasingly about, advertising system, but this is a completely separate process, and I think we need to start really looking at platforms as entities that are providing monetization services, and they have a whole set of systems related to it. They have their specific policies, their specific enforcement mechanism, and we need to start asking them a lot more questions about how that works. And that, I think, in many ways, could really fall on the Commission, and in many ways under some of the DSA existing clauses. It's meant to be future-proof, so it could hopefully capture that in.
Thank you so much, Victoire. I think we are running out of questions. So thank you so much. Again, people in this webinar, if you have any accounts that you want to verify, Victoire has been kind enough to share a QR code during the presentation. And you can, if you watch this on YouTube, you can just like rewind back to that moment of the presentation and be kind, rewind and scan the QR code. Victoire, thank you so much for this. and hope to see you very soon. On our side at EU Disinfolab, a few things that we need to say. We have still one webinar this season, but before that, of course, so the webinars. So the last webinar will be in 2 weeks. 17 July, Influence for Sale, Mapping the Online Manipulation Market with John Rosenbeck from King's College London and University of Cambridge. We'll then take a very long holiday break. We've done a lot of webinars this semester, and we're going to take a few holidays before going back in September. But we're going also to come back in September with the annual conference, which is really now around the corner. You can request your ticket. We can also announce that we released the program, the draft program today, so you can scan this code and go to disinfo.eu/conference. There are still tickets available, but feel free to request your ticket. The sooner, the better. And the program will start 15-16 with a new thing this year, workshops on day 0 of the conference with limited access for registered participants. We really encourage you to look at this, and we hope to see you in Ljubljana, Slovenia, on the 15-16 October, and also on the 14th this day, because you might attend a webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time, for your participation, for your questions. It's been a pleasure to host this webinar with you, and see you around next webinar in 2 weeks. Bye-bye, everybody.